I'm just going to start at 6, even if people are coming in. Not 6, 2. I'm going to start at 6. 2 minutes. Okay, it's all right. Let's go prep all night.
He also likes to teach. Whatever that is, the 100,000
I know Ken is Can you hear me? No, I would love to have her.
Can everyone hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out on this starting to be much nicer Sunday. So we really appreciate you all coming out. Before we bring out our guest, I just wanted to let you all know about a couple of things that are coming up here at Watermark. Are there any Hunger Games fans in the audience? Yes. Sunrise on the Reaping, which is the 5th Hunger Games novel, is coming out on Tuesday, and we are hosting a sunrise release party for that. So if you have any questions, please let us know. But we have tickets available. Tickets are $40 and include a hardcover copy of Sunrise on the Reaping, a complimentary breakfast. There'll be swag, there'll be themed activities. It's going to be a really good time to come and just enjoy this new book with your other Hunger Games fans. Also, if you pay and pre-order for Sunrise on the Reaping by midnight on Monday, you will be automatically entered into a giveaway for this amazing copy of the illustrated version of the Hunger Games. So, get those orders in. You only have like 36 more hours. All right, our next author event that we are so excited about is for Ron Curry for The Savage Noble Death of Babs Dion. He will be here on Friday, March 28th at 6 p.m. This is a really incredible book. Sarah has read it, Shane has read it, I have read it. We all really, really loved it. It's about a female mob boss in a small town in Maine. And she runs a drug ring, and things happen. I don't want to share too much, but it's a really incredible story. So mark your calendars and come out and support Ron for this really great book on March 28th. Okay, let's get ready to bring out our author. So Shane, you all know Shane. He's a bookseller here, really passionate advocate for great literature. He's going to be in conversation with Karen today. And I just want to introduce Karen to you all. I'm sure you all know, but Karen is the author of 5 books of fiction, including the New York Times bestsellers Swamplandia and Vampires in the Lemon Grove, which we have copies of if anyone needs those. She is a MacArthur Fellow. She is the recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She has received 2 National Magazine Awards for fiction, the Shirley Jackson Award, the 2023 Bateri Latte's Grinzane Award, or Prize, the 2024 Mary McCarthy Award, and she was selected for the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 Prize in the New Yorker's 20 Under 40 list. So she just has a really incredible history. She's an incredible writer. We are just so pleased that she was able to be here with us today. So I just want to have us all give a hand to Karen and Shane as they come and talk to us about this great book, The Antidote. They're coming up from the back, so they will be here in a second.
All right. I'm waiting for Shane. always put our
All right,
There you go.
we got it.
Perfect. All right. Well, okay. Thank you everybody for coming out today. We're so excited. Thank you for joining us so much. We're so honored to have you here. We're so.
My fault.
Right.
You can maybe just hear me.
So, I thought that I would share a little story. So our journey at this store with your book started a little over a year ago when Kaveh Akbar was here on his tour for Martyr. And Kaveh was dogmatic about giving no kind of clue about the ending or anything about that. So after everybody had left, myself and a few members of our staff sat around for over an hour and just chatted, and I said, let's talk about this ending. And I expressed how pleased I was with, that he was here, how the event was, and I said, I was a little nervous because he actually just come from having a conversation with you at Powell's a few days before coming here. And so we got started talking about you, and he said, Karen is working on this incredible book. It's this story of theft of native citizens and their land. It's the Dust Bowl and violence against women, and it's this just canopy of a novel that is just brilliant. So for us at the store, we've been thinking and talking about this book for over a year, and we're so excited that this is now culminated here.
Oh my God, I like being reminded of this because I remember exactly the point that I was probably last February. Oh yeah.
Is that better? Ooh. I will tell you, if there is a silver lining, this book was really challenging to research and to write. It took me a long time. And I think the silver lining is just the fact that Shane would call it a book. Makes me feel like it's surreal and wonderful. And I'm super grateful that these are characters that also still kind of blows my mind. Kaveh Akbar is a really dear friend, and he helped me with I sold this book in summer of 2023 and then kind of significantly revised it. And this is the kind of generous soul he is. I mean, he was giving me notes when he was having his own apotheosis and doing that tour, The funniest line in this book is a gift from Kaveh. I won't tell you which one it is, but if you laugh a genuine laugh, you'll be like, oh yeah. I mean,
Tease us like that.
yeah, but it's a group, and I think it's nice to just, writing can really seem like such a solitary activity, and it really is for long stretches, but this book in particular felt like such a real collaboration. I think more so than anything else I've ever written. I mean, there are a lot of voices and visions inside this, and I just think it's nice. Thank you for giving me the chance to say that up front, how grateful I feel to the many people that make a book, right? And to booksellers, and to bookstores, and to readers.
So, and it is. This is a giant book, and I love it. And it reminds me of, So it reminds me of another story. We were meeting with Gabrielle Zevin, and she was noting that a lot of women authors, that in order to find success, they have to write these petite little demure novels that are 200 pages long. And she said, no, I want to be like Jackson Pollock and have the biggest canvas possible.
Yeah.
And that's what this is to me. This is a huge canvas that you've created and you've painted and incorporated in. So you want to talk a little bit about your kind of 16-year journey to this book?
Yeah, I will. And that is not an exaggeration. I got the idea for this book when I was finishing my first novel. I was telling a really sweet group of students outside that I was grateful to them for reading my short stories. Some of the press about this book, makes me feel like I fell into a coma, like some Snow White coma. Maybe it's wired to us. Sorry, this is also, I have like little kids now, and it's like amazing to me that even the questions I could answer for them, like how does a microphone work, I can't. I'm like, it's magic. I don't know.
Great. I'm gonna be just as loud as I can.
Okay.
I can.
Yeah. Maybe if I hold it. I also, my phone died and wouldn't come back on. So just the fact that I'm here is a true miracle we can celebrate. Like, I'm so dependent on the maps, and there was like a moment where I was like, all right, I am alone.
Hers is off.
It's me and the signs and the semis and just fate. So I got the idea for this for now. I'm so sorry, I really wish I could.
Thank you for your patience.
But I do, I have a loud voice. I grew up in a loud family, and so I'll just use that still. I got the idea after I'd written this first book called Swampy India, which is set like in the opposite part of the country in the Florida Everglades. And at that time I was joking I wanted to write Drive in India, my rebound book. And the Dust Bowl on the Southern Plains in the 1930s. I had been inside Swamplandia. There's a section told from the point of view of this young man working for the Civilian Conservation Corps. My grandfather also worked for them. And this is the New Deal program, right? It's one of the relief programs of FDR's New Deal. He's working on a dredge.
Oh, thank you. He's working on a dredge, part of the Army Corps of Engineers dredge and fill campaign. So this had really disastrous consequences for both the ecosystem and for the original people of South Florida, Seminoles and the Miccosukee people.
And it's part of how
tourists come to South Florida, right? There's a lot of infrastructure going in at this time. This is this young guy who just wants to escape debt and an abusive past. He finds himself on this dredge, and is himself kind of the victim of this campaign. And I think, so there's a bridge from that to this history for me. I'll also say, like, our family, some of you might know Hurricane Andrew. I see from your beautiful poreless faces, I'm a lot older than many people in the audience, but Hurricane Andrew destroyed our family's home. And we went to live in Newcastle, Pennsylvania with this great aunt we didn't know for a while, my 3 siblings and I. And so I think that the Dust Bowl, I read Grapes of Wrath, I read Their Eyes Were Watching God. These were like really formative books for me when I was a young person. I think that it always felt resonant to me because it's a story where so many people are losing their homes collectively, where people for a long time are surviving under the hammer of the same weather. But it's also a story where you can see that people bear these costs very unequally. So the disaster reveals other kinds of lines that divide society. I mean, this was my experience of Andrew. It was very devastating to lose our home, but we also got insurance money and we were able to rebuild, and there were a lot of other communities in South Florida that just never came back. So I didn't have a vocabulary for that when I was 11, but it really stamped me. This is a very long answer, but so then I had this image, really like in 2009 or 2010 when I'm also laboring under the delusion, this other book's almost done, of this woman with this antique hearing aid, this ear horn. My children are like the only kids in 2025 that know what that is. They're like, Mama wrote about an ear horn. And I was like, what the heck is that? This lady receiving a secret into her body, right, from one of her customers. So I had this idea of these prairie witches, I call them in the book. They're also called vaults. I see that we're just down the road from the store called the Vault. They're these, this is the lady who calls herself the Antidote, who's the protagonist, one of the protagonists of this book. That's how I first sort of met her. Image of this woman, and she has this customer, and I was like, okay, so something is sinking below the waterline of her consciousness. He'll read his deposit slip backwards, and then he can get that passed back when he feels more equipped to carry it. So he has no idea even, right, like what he deposited. That felt sort of important to me. And I think it was a way, this is just how I write, like things that are so fast moving and abstract, it helps me to kind of literalize them or make a metaphor the story in a way. And so I was just thinking about things that I have exiled from my own waking consciousness, right? Parts of like our family's history that didn't get passed out, parts of our nation's history that didn't get passed down. But I tried to write it a couple times. People keep coming up to me now at events and being like, you told me about this book in 2013. I'm like, shh, like, it's not, here it is.
But it is really
Yeah, I mean, I find that for the writers in the crowd encouraging and discouraging. And I think a lot of the stories, and this short novel, Sleep Donation, that I wrote in the intervening years, not that they were like rehearsals, but when I look at them now, I see how they're kind of testing grounds for some of these same questions.
Absolutely, and I think it's fascinating too that this is not the first time that you've written about Nebraska. It's not the first time that you've written about this era. So there's something here that's calling to you. It feels like.
Yeah, it's mysterious to me too, but I think,
Okay, cool.
yeah, it's mysterious to me too, and I bet, I just think, my metaphor for that is just like, the way blood wells to a cut. I think a lot of writers I love, they don't have infinite preoccupations, and you can sort of see them like turning the rubrics. You see that something does haunt them relentlessly, and it shows up in different ways across the books. And I think for me, something about what felt imperative eventually about this book was reconnecting the Jodes, migrant mother, the things that a lot of us know. You all know more than I do because I was excited to come here. I told my editor, I'm going to get to meet people where this is not the remote past, like the shape of people's living, and people heard stories from their living relatives throughout this time. So I also asked for grace, right? I did my best, everybody, but it's different. It's a different thing to write about, South Florida. I mean, the research I did for that was just being a kid in South Florida, which was grueling research of a different kind. but it was, so I had to talk to a lot of people, I had to read a lot. But I think reconnecting that story, right, of people who lose their homes during the Dust Bowl to the Native nations who are, there's a tremendous land grab that precedes this particular catastrophe. And I grew up knowing about both things and never connecting them as a young person. They lived for me in different boxes. I learned about them in different units of a social, and not because anybody was malicious, right? My social studies teacher, I think, wasn't, wouldn't have. Right. But that was the way that I think that's still the way many people hold this history. So I think Swamplandia is sort of starting. It's a more emotional book, and there's not the same kind of politics or analysis in that book that I kind of came to through the stories and later. But in a way, it's the same story, and you can see that not just on the Southern Plains in the 1930s, but today.
Right. So, and the as I read the book, so the kind of core element of this, kind of the core theme, is this idea of this amnesia, this purposeful amnesia, or the things that like you said, the things that we choose to remember, the things that we choose to forget, and why, and what those mechanisms are. And this like idea of this like kind of mass forgetting that we culturally undergo. Yeah. Could you kind of like share a little bit about like like which piece of this story kind of came first? Was it the mass forgetting? Was it the Dust Bowl, the people, the characters? Like how did that evolve over this kind of period of time?
Yeah, I'm so also relieved to talk to Shane and to people in a bookstore. I feel like I've gotten some of these questions from disembodied voices on for interviews where they're like, this is live, go. And I'm like, whoa! And then I talk like I drank 17 Dr. Peppers. And I sound like I'm having a stroke. So I'm happy to have a little more time. And also, just to be very honest, I write a first draft the way readers read. So I didn't go into this with any really grand ambition. I imagined I would talk about this history because if you're writing about forgetting on the plains, right, or forgetting in America, there's no way not to talk about this. And I think some reviews have said, oh, there's so much going on. This, as you said too, right? Like there's, sexist attitudes, like dehumanizing attitudes about people of color. There are a lot of issues, climate, and it's like, but that is what's happening in these people's lives, right? So I think like that issues eviction or that, this is just, I started there. I was like, who are these people? What's happening in their lives? Who is this woman? Like I genuinely didn't know. I had that image of her and I was like, how did she wind up doing this for a living? And so then I think, and you learn that drafting, it's really mysterious. And not to say that it's like some pure channeling, like I'm as biased and corrupt as anybody else, but I really didn't know going in. So the other characters, there's this woman who calls herself the Antidote, who is sort of selling her oblivion as a cure-all. I sort of saw her like in line with all these other snake oil salesman. If you guys have seen those ads where they're like, cocaine drops will fix your fix your marriage, whatever. Like, fix your back pain and your marriage. Like, I mean, these things where these panaceas are offered that it's funny and it's also tragic. One part of the history I learned that's not in this book is that after many veterans become addicted to cocaine, right? In the same way we have this opioid crisis now because they come back from this war and that's what's offered as medicine. So thinking about, in a real way, like in our own bodies and in our own families, how some of these larger forces, what we are, how they warp us or how they shape us, and where those kind of omissions, which can feel like so private, right, and so interior, how they sort of aggregate into this mass denial. That's something I felt a novel can do that, like, you can't really study. You can't really tally some of these invisible losses scientifically, right? There's no way. And so I think that was something that the book sort of pushed me to think through, but I didn't know that going in necessarily. I think I was just like, what brought this woman here? She loses her baby at this home for unwed mothers. And I think in my imagination, I was like, of course, that opens this space inside her that she rents as storage. A lot of these other witches who do this for a living, they had something happen to them that opens up some space that never closes. It's sort of like this open wound that they're renting out as storage. And I mean, that's a metaphor, but I think there's a literal reading too when you think about how we carry the past and these sort of unspeakable things like harms done and harms endured, like where they exist outside of any written text or archive.
So why don't we use that as an opportunity, if you would like to read a little bit about the Antidote and meet up with her on Black Sunday.
And if you guys have stories about the Dust Bowl, I'm going to just stick around. I really would love to hear them. Somebody last night brought me a picture of her father at a jack drive. This book opens with this really violent jack drive. He was 5 or 6. And said that, that was a traumatic memory for him.
And that chapter of the book was an incredible way to begin because, like, you get that indelibility of, just the harshness.
Just the harshness, and also I think that story of necessity, which can really underwrite and enable a lot of violence. That feeling of like nobody likes it, but this is just the world as it is. And this little child, from his earliest moments, sort of learning how to put on this cloak of benumbment. I mean, I think that's a lot of people's stories. And so this is an epigraph from Marie Howe. I read it at a different bookstore and people clapped and I was like, oh, that's Marie Howe. So, but I do think it's really beautiful. And I would encourage everyone to go find this poem. It's Gretel from a Stunning Clearing by Marie Howe. But I remember you before you became a story. Sometimes I feel a thorn in my foot where there is no thorn. They tell me, not unkindly, that I should imagine nothing here, but I believe you are still alive. So this is section 1, Collapse. The Prairie Witch. A person can lose everything in an instant. A fortune, a family, the sun. I've had to learn this lesson twice in my life. The first time it happened, I was a 15-year-old fugitive from the home for unwed mothers. And the second time I was a prairie witch chained to my cot in a cinder block jailhouse. Your second home, the sheriff likes to say. Officially, I do not exist in his West. Nevertheless, it is a crime to pay me a visit. On Black Sunday, before anybody knew to call it Black Sunday, I woke up in the jailhouse to a sound like a freight train tunneling through me. An ear-splitting howl that seemed to shake the stone walls. My body trembled like a husk on the cot. My fingers clawed into the mattress. For those early moments in the dark, I was nothing but the fear of floating off. What had happened to me while I slept? It felt as if a knife had scraped the marrow from my bones. Something vital inside me had liquefied and drained away, and in its place was the new weightlessness. Lightness and wrongness, a blanketing whiteness that ran up my spine and seeped out of my mouth. Bankrupt was the word that rose in my mind. At first, I did not recognize the voice crying out for help as my own, and I clamped down on the sound, panicked. I could not afford to lose any more ballast. My numb limbs began to prickle with feeling, pins and needles stitching them back to my brain. It was not a happy reunion. 10 white toes sprouted like mushrooms on the edge of a filthy green blanket, waving to me from the outermost limit of what I could make out. A kerosene lantern in the hallway gave off a feeble emerald glow, beyond which the cell plunged into shadow. Not even the pain was mine. It came and went like the wind. Then it drilled through my skin and swallowed the world. Or perhaps the black blizzard was well underway when I woke up. Choking heat filled the jailhouse and lashing tails of dust. It occurred to me that I might be buried here before I could recollect who I was. Minutes lost all meaning. I balled up on the cot and prepared to be pulled apart by a cyclone. Eventually the winds began to weaken. Light cut a pathway across the turbulent sky. I watched a pale line brightening and widening through the small cell window. A greenish disk hung above the cloud wall, and it took me ages to remember the sun. It was not midnight after all, but well past noon. I began to remember more about the land beyond this cell, the edgeless prairie. The name of the town where I worked returned to me, Nebraska, southeast of the Sandhills, west of the Platte. We were 4 years into the worst drought that any newcomer to the plains had ever experienced. Other beings kept older diaries. Cord cottonwood trees told a millennial story written in wavy circles that no politician had cared to read. Congressmen trained themselves to think in election cycles, not planetary ones. They see spiking market highs and lows and forget how to read in circles. Us had been having brownouts for months, plagues of jaws and mandibles. Grasshoppers rattled down on the tractor cabs from hissing clouds. Thousands of rabbits fanned over the plains, chewing through anything green. Winged indigo beetles blew in from God alone knew where. Red sand from Oklahoma and black dirt from Kansas and dove gray earth from the eastern plains of Colorado formed a rolling ceiling of dust above us that flashed with heat lightning. My job returned to me before my name did. Yes, I am the antidote, I learned and remembered. I am a prairie witch. Now I could picture my rented room in the boarding house, my poster facing the street, the antidote of us now accepting deposits. I advertised my services as a panacea for every ailment from heartburn to nightmares. Some of my customers, I recalled, had made up a little jingle about me. The antidote to lovesickness, the antidote to grief, the antidote to gas pains, the antidote to guilt, the antidote to sleepless nights, the antidote to sweaty palms, the antidote to daydreaming, the antidote to shame. Most everyone on the plains knew about us, even those who denied our existence. The vaults, some called us, the prairie witches. And I remembered what I did to earn my bread, what I had been doing since I was a much younger woman, absorbing and storing my customers' memories, baking secrets for the townspeople of Uz, sins and crimes, first and last times, nights of unspeakable horror and dewdrop blue mornings, or who knew what my customers had transferred from their bodies into mine. These were only my guesses. I disappeared into a spacious blankness during my transfers. A witch's body is a room for rent, a vault to store the things people cannot stand to know or bear to forget. That's it. That's who she is.
That's amazing. And what's fascinating to me is, so the antidote, the vault, as the kind of titular character, like you could have written a much simpler book, right? Just with that focus on that one character. But rather, like, I don't know that there's one character that's even more important than the other in this story, because each of them has this component that is this richness of the whole.
I'm so glad that's reading. It's interesting because I feel some of like I mean, it's hard to market a book where there is no elevator pitch that's so, I'm like, does this elevator hopefully have 19 floors? Like, I hope we're in a big skyscraper, and I think that what we landed on was 5 characters whose fates become entangled after the Black Sunday duster, which is, I mean, it is, factually true, but I loved, this book really stamped me as a young person. Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. I'm sure that the idea of this person who's like a vault of people's secrets owes a huge debt to John Singer from that novel, who really is the keeper of his Georgia Milltown secrets. But what I loved about that book as a young person, she writes from the point of view of a black abolitionist doctor, sort of like Jack Blount, who's like an idealist and a socialist. She writes from the point of view of like conservative people. It's a real composite view of the town. I mean, the town becomes a character.
Right.
And she writes from the point of view of this young person, Mick, who, when I was that exact age, I had never read an author take with equal seriousness and care the interior of an adolescent and an adult man. I had never read a book like that.
Which is, I think I had read somewhere too that a piece of the worst advice you ever had was to not write young characters.
Yeah, it's true.
And in this book, there's this just, I don't even know how to describe Dell, is that like, such a spark and
Yeah.
like could not be beaten.
Yeah, I really love this. She's like this very feral. This character I wrote, Ava, it would be like I think some of the grief that made Ava makes her too, but like she's so much angrier and has had to fend for herself for a long time. And I think what I liked about Dell, I really like this character, I hope you will too. She makes some terrible judgment calls, actually. She really also, her mother has been murdered. She's really not interested. She's really in flight from grief. Just like the drumming of a basketball, like, the way it sounds like a metronome. This is not someone who's interested. The first line of her section is, if you sync up your breath with the thing breathing behind you, you can barely hear it at all. She's not interested in feeling. And this is her way of avoiding feeling. And so she really just wants to win. And I read about these girls, and Lydia Reader's excellent, Dust Bowl girls. I had decided that there would be basketball in this because I played on a basketball team. It was one of my favorite memories. Yeah. Also with what I like about these young people is that they're just refusing all adult, they refuse to be kind of like condescended to. School is suspended, it's the Dust Bowl, and they're still like, we're gonna have a season. Like, we're not gonna let this outer weather.
And they get abandoned by the adults.
They're totally abandoned by all of the adults, and they're like, let's still practice in this whirlwind. Like, let's still see if we can.
Across the stage.
Yeah, it matters so much. And I was thinking too about some of the things we celebrate is really American virtues, right? Like that kind of like single-minded drive, right? And the way that those can also tilt into something like delusion, or the way that you can be almost like Captain Ahab. This is another famous American example of someone that this is a quality to celebrate in some context, but it's also, Dell gets, it's so important to her that she's risking like her entire team for a game, right? And that story repeats. There are echoes of it. This is a microcosm of something that happens, I think, in our society at large too. We have this winner-take-all economy that has tremendous costs to ecosystems and to real people today.
So the other part of this that really stands out to me is there's this unspoken bond between all of these characters, where all of these major characters that we'll talk through here. The next person that I want to talk about a lot, and also kind of touch on your other kind of like perhaps literary influence, and that is Harp, and the role that like the Book of Job plays in this book.
I love the Book of Job. You can't really be like any other Book of Job fans. Get your lighters out. I think it's the most mysterious and beautiful book in the Bible. I don't know. There was a period, that was the joke in our family. My mom was like, in her Marge Simpson, I love my mom so much, she was like, we are living the Book of Job. I bet all families have, I just think this is universal. I don't meet people who are like, I've never suffered here, but I think, Harp is somebody who is a zero-yield man. He's a failure. He's living through, he's really someone, too, who has sort of been, there's a sociologist, Avery Gordon, I love this crystalline articulation of the pain that I think is shot through this book, too. She says, the pain of being born into a contest that you did not design. But also feeling like you can't change it. I think he is quite resigned to this system and his own failure within it. And then on Black Sunday, his crops are spared. And dust storms continue to sort of swerve around him. He sort of feels like he's encased, this frame is around him, much like Job, except he's like Job in reverse. Things are going better and better for this man, and it's terrifying to him. And a lot of the book, he's asking, why me? And some of the book is sort of nudging him away from that question. I don't know. He's like a bachelor uncle and everything. So it's very, I was with Rick Simonson and Elliot Bay Books, and he was like, Karen, the sex in this book is very Midwestern. And it was just kind of, I'm like, yes, all fours, this is not. Like, if you guys want an erotic thriller, these are like traumatized people who are like, oh my God, someone touched me with love. And they're like,
A brief touch on the knee
they're like,
is like a compliment.
1,000%, right? It's someone who's like, wow, this can feel good, exclamation mark. The miracle here, but I do think that, I mean, there is sweetness and love in this book too. Gordon Parks was a big influence on this book in different ways, and I will just say I was rereading to prepare for interviews and stuff, A Choice of Weapons, and he says, you know, the camera is not only a tool for documenting misery, and I really clung to that here too. I was like, it's not, people are going through some unbearable things, but of course there's laughter. Of course you're like thrilled when some dime-sized piece of your flesh like touches your teammates, and you know, but yeah, that's, now you guys all know. If you were hoping to be unbearably aroused, titillated, Rick Simonson says the sex is very Midwestern. My husband was there for that reading, and I somehow felt this dueling like imperative, both to say nothing because my face was red, and also be like, our sex life rules, Rick. I don't know. Anyway.
So I'm so glad that you brought up Gordon, because there's a piece that we cannot not talk about here, and that's the role of the photographers in this fascinating history of these hole punch photos, and then also what I think to me is one of the more fascinating characters, because what I also love about the book is it can be dark and depressing, and there's weighty material here, the consequences of this memory loss that we have, and the theft of the land and all these things, but through this all there's a thread of hope, and your character Cleo, I think, exemplifies this. But also, we're right here, we're in a town where there's a school named after Gordon Parks. This is near and dear to our heart.
Yeah.
So can you kind of share us a little bit more about like what you found with these hole punch photos and the way that plays into like our intentionally suppressed memory,
Yeah.
and Cleo as a character?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had this idea, as someone reminded me not long ago, really back in 2013 and earlier, that there was going to be a photographer character. And I think part of that is when I was thinking about my own understanding of this time. So much of what substitutes for like a memory, right, or has the texture of memory for this period that I never lived, you know, for the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl drought, are these photographs from the Farm Securities Administration, which was originally the Resettlement Administration. The Resettlement Administration, at its inception, is meant to kind of take poor farmers off submarginal lands, these really degraded lands where the soil is loose and powdery and blowing, and resettle them, you know, into kind of farmsteads or onto better land. But there also, you know, there's the Agricultural Adjustment Act. There are all these relief programs, and there was this propaganda wing of the New Deal, the historic section run by Roy Stryker. I know a lot of you guys know this history living here with Gordon, but and his legacy. But I knew, you know, Migrant Mother, the farmer and his two sons fleeing a dust storm. I mean, some of this stuff, even if you don't know how to source it, it's like we've seen it in documentaries, we've seen it in history books. I was thinking about how that gets created, like the story that people know about a period of time. When I started writing it, I learned there's also this sort of shadow archive that you guys can also see at the Library of Congress if you just put hole punched images into the search engine. So Roy Stryker with like a literal hole punch. If a negative, if you rejected it, they kept them, but often they're not captioned and they're not titled, they weren't printed, they weren't circulated. His photographers hated this practice and he later abandoned it. Because that ruined their work, you know? But it is interesting to sort of look at them, and sometimes we don't know the rationale for why he rejected something. There are also letters where he's very explicit. He says in one letter to Dorothea, take pictures of white farmers and black farmers, but lay the emphasis on the white, because those will have a much higher likelihood of being circulated. The Southern Democrats control the purse strings of Congress. The New Deal is very controversial. So they're being sent out to like look for, you know, the need that really exists in rural poverty, and to document that, and also the success of this aid, how it's helping. And to think about who and what gets omitted from that particular story became sort of fascinating to me, and resonant maybe with some of these omissions that are happening privately in communities, in towns, inside people's own bodies. And Cleo, so Cleo is someone who said she's a fictional photographer, but I had read all this correspondence between Arthur Rothstein, Walker Evans, you know, these people that are some of our greatest American documentary photographers. And it was interesting too, the book sort of reproduces in a way, I think, that tension between wanting to document reality and wanting to change it, right? Wanting to make propaganda for like the future world you would hope to see, a more just future. That lives in this file, and I think that the book, I wouldn't have guessed that going into it, but the book, that tension lives here too. Cleo gets this camera at a pawn shop, and it just has a longer range than her original camera. And she can sort of make photographs of yesterday and tomorrow. Like, whatever she sees in the ground glass is not what appears in the dark room.
Yeah, and it's this bit of magic that gives us hope, right? You know, to remind us of what was in the past, but also what's the potential in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, that Gordon quote I mentioned just because that was a real guiding light for me here. Because even inventing a technology with that obviously comes with this tremendous responsibility that I struggled with too. Like, I needed a lot of help. I needed to have conversations with people. There's no way to, like, quote unquote get it right, you know? There's never going to be a novel that's a complete 360 of all that's been lost or suppressed or distorted. So I sort of started to feel, and I mean, along with, I guess, these characters, yeah, that there are these two technologies in the book, and one are these witches that have these conduits for swallowing and absorbing the past and holding it in some spandrel where we really can't reckon with it. And then Cleo has like the camera, which is this bringing things to light, right? Bringing the past to light and to life, but not just the past here, right? I think that I was also writing at a time where I'd been writing some really dark stuff and frustrated with my own imagination. It felt like such a wall. I was like, gosh, it's so easy to imagine a dystopia right now, for me.
Yeah.
I get there in no time. And that is an indictment too of these systems, right? It's so plausible to many of us. I think at 4 a.m. it is so easy to conjure the exact world and rehearse for the very world that like we fear inhabiting, right? Like some fortress world where some people have everything and a lot of other people are suffering outside the gates. And so I think, you know, I mean, that is, I don't, you know, conviction always scares me, but I do really have this conviction now, Shane, that if more of us do that envisioning work, it will help, because it's so much harder, I think. And I think because a lot of people have grown up in these systems that we don't have these experiences to extrapolate from of like what a world of shared abundance might actually feel like. So that, and even that, like, it invites such an eye roll even to say that in any kind of lighting. But then we're like rolling away from that work.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Well, and I think that this is a piece. So I've got two things left that I want to talk about, and then we'll get to some questions from the audience. But there's two things that I just have to get to, and one is I think that you summarize this at the end really well and really beautifully. Is that you know, your kind of closing piece about that you had these kind of this idea to come with the future, but that you know, as you got to the end, you're like, you know, like the cap is off the lens and we're still like pointing to the future and it's left to be determined. But we have that power, and part of that is just talking with people and making friends.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that happened for me outside of this book, and even if I managed to encode like a fraction of the hope that did give me in this book, I will be really happy. Because unlike other things, as I mentioned, right, the research I used to do was like reading, you know, watching film. You know, I didn't really go out and meet people. But with this particular book, I was having such a hard time actually like thinking through like, well, how are we, like, reckon with the past, even, or like process these emotions. Sometimes these phrases, I'm like, what do people mean? What does it look like? It can feel so like abstract and far away. So I had this real beautiful opportunity. You know, I just cold called people. One of them was the historian James Ridingen, who has a statement that we wrote together in the back of this book. He's a Pawnee citizen, a historian. He's, like my dad, a disabled veteran of the Vietnam War. And he's a wonderful person, and he's a friend now. But he wasn't when I called him, right? We just had conversations over years, plural. I went on a research trip with his family to Pawnee homelands in Nebraska. I had this like very beautiful opportunity to watch like this real work in real time, where at the U.S. Indian boarding school at Genoa, there's a group of people who are doing, they call it a digital reconciliation project. So they're bringing this history home to Native families and communities, but to all of us, right? Like, I didn't grow up as a very young person, you know, in elementary school, high school. I didn't know about federal Indian boarding schools. And, you know, Biden issued an apology. Here at Genoa, they have like a day of remembrance where they light the Capitol orange. And And that remembering, watching that sort of, and it's, so that it can't happen again. But also, I think, many people told me, it is happening today, right? Yeah, thank you, it is. This is still the history, it's ongoing. So this isn't safely in the past at all. And getting to see people who are so committed to healing and justice and what it looks like on the ground was a real gift to me into this book. Because I felt like I can't imagine it alone at my desk, right? Like you really have to participate in it, even to see and not just believe, but know what's necessary and what's possible.
Well, and you gave me the perfect segue to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that was that this was this collaborative effort, and I want to make sure we draw attention to James' contribution. And there is a land loss acknowledgement, which in a lot of our society these days, I feel like it's lost its meaning, right?
Yeah.
Like you watch an award show and they'll talk about like, we need to acknowledge that this is native land, and then that's it, and then nothing else is said or done.
Right.
This powerful statement at the end of your book with James, I think make sure that you don't move past that, and if you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted there to be a bridge from this book, which is an alternate Nebraska with witches and sort of some wild stuff happening. I wanted there to be a bridge to the real history. And I'm so honored to have James' words in this book because he can write about this from a perspective that is not my own. And he brings it right up to the present. The last photograph in this book that contains a lot of photographs from these hole punched images, most of them are from that period of time, right, the 1930s. The last photo is one he took in 2023 of the shuttered boarding school on Pawnee lands and a newly constructed earth lodge or mud lodge next to it. And I'm so happy, that is the last photo that people see. If you go to my website too, he reads the statement and you can read it there. If you don't, I hope you buy a book, but if you don't, it's there too. And he lost federal funding for something called the Mukurtu Portal, which is going to be a digital archive for Pawnee citizens, but for all of us too, with newspaper. This history from his perspective as a Native historian. So if people happen to want to make a donation, if you're so moved, or if you know of a foundation, this was just one very small way I suggested to James when I went on the road. I said, I'll mention it when I go to bookstores. If you know of some grant that funds, it's a really powerful thing. And I think that idea of a portal that bridges this past and the future we want to get to also feels really important right now.
Absolutely. So, and I will say too, this is a book that, a lot of books, you can do an audio book with, you can do an electronic version. You're missing a lot if you don't have the physical copy of this book because it is so stuffed with maps and photographs, and it just augments it so much. And then, and then I'll just close real quick too with, we talked a little bit about Morgan Talty, and he had a really powerful kind of comment about memory. In fact, it's actually on the back of the book.
Yeah.
If you'd like to kind of talk about Morgan and the significance of his thoughts here and to you.
Yeah. I bet this is going to get more of a response than the Book of Job. Any Morgan Talty super fans in the crowd? I feel like I love his story so much. I love his novel, Fire Exit, which Shane and I were talking about. What a masterpiece it really is. He read this book when it was in manuscript form and was such a good friend to me into this book. And he said, on the back, memory is both the poison and the cure here. And I think his novel, Fire Exit, makes a really, it's pushing in the same direction, right? It's sort of trying to make that restoration. And it really, if you read it, it is in the most loving way and also the most kind of scathing way, somehow simultaneously, both an indictment of colonial violence and like a blueprint for this world of belonging. And it's so hard to talk about that in this kind of writing, but I don't have to because you'll read the book and it will do its experiential work. He's been reading Blackbeard the Pirate since like 1996. He's like, I might have to wait. Hopefully there'll be a movie.
I just want to say thank you. This has been an amazing opportunity for those of us in Wichita. And the irony of having a dust storm like 2 days ago.
I drove through that.
It's just...
I drove through that in Lawrence.
I know. Your witches came alive somehow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my friend said, girl, they're gonna think your publicist did this.
I have to admit, I have not read you. Am I correct in placing you with George Eliot's Melon Flocks and Catherine Ann Porter's works?
I'm always, I mean, I think this is the creature that I am, where you could genuinely, most proper nouns, I'd be like happy to be associated. I mean, Catherine Ann Porter, and but I wouldn't, I think it's a little bit of a, I have kind of a sci-fi fantasy lineage also, and I grew up in South Florida reading a lot of the Latin American magical realists, but also reading the Eastern European fabulous like Kafka and you know, Calvino's Cosmic Comics. If people want a book that is playful and serious right now, it's just like the most deeply pleasurable read for me still. I love both of those writers. I think like the lineage that I'm aware of. Flannery O'Connor though, also Carson McCullers, Toni Morrison is a huge influence.
Hi, thank you for coming and also for all of your writing. Hi.
Oh, hi, sorry. This also keeps happening. I would be looking at people's like shuttered faces while they beam to me. The voice is not mine.
But yeah, really thank you for all of your writing. You, even especially in this book, but in all of your work, you take magical and surreal elements and you connect all of them to make them feel so real. And like I said, especially in this one, with so many parts coming together to make one cohesive whole about what it means in many ways you can lose a home and the importance of memory, as well as when it's healthy to confront those social memories and what can happen if you try too early. How do you think about that when you're writing? Like, how do you connect all those characters to make them feel so real and so much magic?
Oh, I'm so glad they feel that way. I mean, I had really good teachers too. I think, you know, good teachers like in high school and college, graduate school, but also good teachers inside of books. And I mentioned, you know, I remember reading 100 Years of Solitude and just walking around the rains of Miami just agog at how much that book contained and at the ways that the wilder elements were always in the service of illuminating something true. And so I think that book was a teacher for sure and still is. You know, Flannery has, I mean, she's a Southern Gothic writer, but I think she has some of the best advice for people writing speculative fiction or writing fantasies, where she says, you know, there's an even greater demand on you than people writing sort of quote unquote realism, because you have to earn the authority to rearrange nature. You still have to convince readers through the senses that this is possible and plausible. And you have to make them care about it. And those two things are real. Like, one is like craft, and I think one is closer to magic. Like making a world that readers can receive and live in and believe in, like this rule-governed world of consequence, whatever kind of world. Like if you're writing about Detroit or Macondo, it's sort of the same, right? Like there's a real art to that. But then making a stranger, like just using words on paper to make anybody care about anything, I think honestly is a kind of sorcery. And I mean, we all write, every writer I know is like fledged in a school or a library. And it's like reading the other people that make you care so deeply about their imaginary people that makes you want to do it. But that, like using stuff from terrestrial reality, like the brick and mortar world, to build an imaginary world. You know, for this book, I'm not a photographer. I take like thousands of hours of video of my children doing nothing. But I'm not like, that's not my particular skill. So my friend Andrew Moore, who has a beautiful book, Dirt Meridian, all of his photographs are beautiful. He helped me so much with just the mechanics, like what does a dark room smell like? I went into root cellars also. Like I really felt like I needed to know that to have this sort of impossible thing feel true. And it was really helpful. You know, he sent me so many notes where he would say things like, Karen, the infinity stop on a camera is just a small piece of metal, you know, like right when I was getting sort of too poetic or too excited about things. And so figuring that out, there's a real art to that too, how to use material from terrestrial reality to make something impossible feel true.
Thank you.
Hello.
Found you.
I've been found. Thank you very much for coming, and your books are amazing. I've only read a few short stories from Orange World, but I'm very excited to read The Antidote. in reading the magical realism and kind of fabulism of Orange World, I kind of like was inspired to write my own little like commentary on AI, like for a lizard man that eats intelligence. So thank you for that inspiration. And my kind of question was having to do with, we were talking about the verisimilitude of the reader believing the content. My kind of question is, how do you write short stories in such little wording, but it means just so many things at once?
I feel like, thank you so much. I can't wait for Lizard Man. I don't know why this feels relevant. Like, we just had to do the school pay for a field trip. Our kids go to like a STEM public school in Portland, and they were like, "You forgot to sign the form for Mr. Lizard." And I was like, "Oh." I didn't get much. I hope that Mr. Lizard is a kind man. I mean, he's coming to the school now. I think I love short stories because they feel like experiments to me a little bit. And I feel like I have a little more control there than I do in a novel. You can kind of walk the whole. You can set the controls with a little bit more precision than the big canvas, maybe. So I love them too, because I feel like I have these kind of wild conceits. What would happen if a group of nuns re-educated the daughters of werewolves would be one, right? And that just sounds like a bad Saturday Night Live sketch, as my sister pointed out. But I think it lets me be honest about things that I really don't know how to be honest about. Like in this kind of lighting, if I was writing an essay, I wouldn't get there. I think what I learned from Calvino, for example, who writes these beautiful, whimsical, but also deeply philosophical stories, is you kind of have to disarm yourself first sometimes. I feel that way anyway. Some of the, people are like, "Why do you write this weird stuff?" I'm like, some of this stuff is so, the everyday violence that I am so inured to, how would I get there with this mind and this lighting, under the spell of my own name? I would not be able to. So that's one reason I love short stories. And I also think they hit really hard because you read them in a single sitting. I think they have some of the power of poetry. You can micro-tune language, and you can really work with the sound and the sense. To say, it's like an acoustic experience too. In a novel, what can be frustrating me is some of it you just have to move the furniture around. It can't, you can't have quite that same pressure and density all the time on the sentences. So that's a long answer just to say, I wish more people would read short stories. I love stories. I'm excited for Stag Dance that's out. There's so many good collections coming too.
We have time for one more question. Right back here.
Hi, Karen. I read in Poets and Writers that one of the big changes that happened for you over the course of the novel was that you had children, or you became a mother. I want to make sure I said that so you didn't think I was creeping on you from something. But I was curious, as a father of young children myself, what kind of impact did that have on the way that this story was written, especially characters all the way from the Prairie Witch to the Tabby Cat,
Yeah, thank you. I love that question. I know. There's a cat. That's one of my favorite. The cat is always so mad when I don't mention the cat, is my feeling. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I really don't think people have asked me so you couldn't write it and you couldn't write it, and then it kind of took off again for me. I started from scratch. I had been thinking about this book for so long and had put it aside. It genuinely felt kind of beyond me, or I didn't know. It felt sort of stiff. I was writing it from the third person point of view. It felt kind of like a stiff ventriloquy of a character, not a real character. So I think one answer is there was some real animal bridge to this woman. And I think I felt braver too. I had to sort of, without getting too personal, return to stuff that was I didn't really care to write about it. And I think somehow the kids make everything more acute, right? So I think my own sense of responsibility for this world, I wrote about children and adolescents a lot when I was a younger writer, and I felt less culpable also as a younger writer for the world that exists today. And I think these kids made it feel more urgent also. This book is more direct than other things I've written. And that felt, I think, that in a funny way, I think I owe that to the kids too. They made me braver, maybe, and they gave me this urgent wish to try to tune my imagination to a world that's not apocalyptic.
Well, thank you, Karen, so much for being here. Can we have a round of applause for this?
you all again for coming out for this. Karen is going to sign some books for us, so I would like you all, if you're going to get a book signed, we're going to make an aisle here and around the back to this table over here. So come around and then you'll just sort of make your way back out. But if you need a book signed and you don't have one yet, we still have plenty of copies up at the front. Okay, sorry, one more.